Welcome again, everyone. My name is Timothy Cross. I am one of today's hosts. We also, again, David, we're back.
We're back. David Choate here, director of ShareFaith Kids. And there is a comment that came through that I just have to highlight here from Grayson West that says, "We love your ongoing support with these webinars. You're filling our sails with wind." Tim, I told you, you've always been filled with hot air, my man, and someone is recognizing it and calling it out, and I love that.
Sometimes you just got to embrace what God gives you, and I'm full of hot air. So, I mean, there you go. We're glad to be able to help you out, Grayson. To your point, and I think this is a little segue to it, I would say Ministry Brands is, if you don't know who we are, and this is your first time with us on a webinar, or you've been attending each and every single daily webinar, we're here to support you during this time. Ministry Brands is a family of individual brands that have come together with some integration around technology. So each brand kind of specializes in a unique way in this church world. So we have, like today, we're really going to be talking about cybersecurity, and one of the best companies out there protecting ministries is literally called Protect My Ministry. So what's great about that is they're a part of Ministry Brands, and we can then integrate this amazing company with so many amazing resources to protect your ministry with all of our other brands out there. So it's great. That's who we are.
Yeah.
We love you as a church. We love churches, and we're here to support you.
Yeah, for sure. And on that, I will say, there's a lot of different brands, and some you know better than others, but I've had a chance to really get to know the people behind Protect My Ministry, and they're not just people that are knowledgeable about background checks, but really knowledgeable about the church, actively involved in their churches, and passionate about seeing ministries succeed, but also being aware of the threats and risks that are out there. So it's great products that are backed by great people that know and partner together. So it really is a privilege to be here at Ministry Brands.
Yep. And then something we want to remind everybody that if during the webinar you have any questions, you can use that Q&A feature that's a part of Zoom. But then going forward, we have an email, careteam@ministrybrands.com, that we've put together that you can email them questions. And no matter what product you need help on, whatever it might be, we can get you in contact with the correct person to really help you in that time. Because again, we care about you. We want to see you succeed. So David, without further ado, you have a bit of encouragement for everyone today, right?
A little bit. So I woke up this morning and came across a website that talked about the 5-6 questions you should be asking yourself during a quarantine or during this time of social distancing. And they were great. And the one that was at the top of the list that I loved was, what are you thankful for? And it took me back to 1 Thessalonians 5:18, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. And so what I'd like to start today doing is by issuing a challenge to everyone watching here today to summarize in 5 words or less something that you are thankful for, and then drop that in the comment section. I've got mine loaded and ready to go. My main man, Tim Cross. Yeah.
You know,
what do you think about that one, buddy?
It's so close to what I was going to say, which my main man, David Choate. I don't even know. Are we?
It seems ridiculous.
Are we? Is this the end of our webinar series?
We've been actively trying to get booted, right? I mean, it's an ongoing wonder of ours. How much longer will they let us continue?
It's an ongoing, it's how you say wonder that they keep asking us to come back. We're not sure, but we're glad that you're enjoying it and that we're able to do this. Really what it is we're just trying to get out of the way and bring the experts on. That's the plan.
On that note, why don't you walk us through the topics that we've covered up until this point, so that if you're just tuning in for the first time, today is going to be about cybersecurity, and we're going to be talking to Protect My Ministry. But we've had 6 days, whatever it's been now, of fantastic content on different subjects. So walk us through that real quick.
Yeah, so we've covered everything from one webinar being dedicated to doing Easter online. But something I want to mention is if you go back and watch that one, what's great about it is it just talks about principles about doing an online service. So yeah, it was really focused around Easter, but a lot of the principles that we taught on that will help you with any online service that you do. We cover digital giving, preparing your website and mobile apps for Easter and beyond. We talked about taking your kids' ministry online. In fact, something that we were able to do, David, is, as you know, because you and I did, we got asked during the webinar if there was any like way that we could kind of show in video editing software how to put that together. So this morning, if you can tell from the picture and what I'm wearing, I recorded it this morning, and it is now available on that resources website page where I spend 20 minutes and kind of give you some brief overviews on how to put it together. I use Adobe Premiere as my video editing software, but the principles that I teach are they work for any video editing out there. So
I do want to say, like, on that note, what Tim has done in this video, it's great for the free resources we provided for kids ministry. But if you're going to be editing any kind of video for your Easter services or beyond, please check this out. He does such a great job. I know I give you a hard time, but you really do a great job in this video of step-by-step talking about what video editing is, some principles, and then like, here's how we do it. So it's great.
Yeah, it goes back to what I was saying is we're here to support you, especially during this time of church online. So in addition to that, we gave away an Easter pack that you can get access to, which gives you everything you would need to put an online Easter service on together. And we talked a bit about that. Yesterday was great conversation too. Yesterday's conversation was about mass communication. And there's a guest that they had on that I don't know if he was that good, but the guy who focused on mass communication, phenomenal. Tim Cross, I think, was the guest yesterday. He talked
a little
crazy. But we did bring somebody on, Dylan from High Ground Solutions, and he provided some great content for you kind of on that. So David, you want to tell people what we got still going on?
I don't know what that was, but it happened. So this week, we've got a few more webinars upcoming. We're coming to the end of this 2-week span of doing daily webinars leading up to Easter. But today through Thursday, we're going to have a daily live streaming webinar. So if you still have some questions about live streaming, want to know what it looks like to get signed up, need some help with like the technical aspects of it, we have daily webinars that are happening today and Thursday, and that's through churchstreaming.tv. So they'll make sure that you get set up with that. We also have daily digital giving webinars, and these ones are tailored to new members to any of our giving platforms. And so if you have signed up and you're still not quite sure what to do or how to really get this thing up and going, we have daily webinars specifically answering your questions, showing you step-by-step how to make sure your giving is up and ready to go. It's the same webinar every day, so you don't have to it's not a sequence that you have to make, but if you take today's and you still have questions, you can jump back in tomorrow and really get that locked in. Today, as Tim's mentioned, we are talking about rethinking risks, cybersecurity, and really excited about that. We've got Dan from Protect My Ministry, PMM, on with us. Had a brief conversation with him before this started, and I'm really looking forward to diving into that. And then tomorrow, we're going to have our final thoughts on heading into Easter online, some tips and tricks. And then we're going to have Pastor Kenner Gottsman on, and he's just going to share some words of encouragement for pastors, for congregants, just some different perspectives that we can discuss as we go into this Easter season. Some of it are things he's learned with Church Online. Some of it will be just thoughts on what do we need to make sure that we have dialed in and focused on regardless of what the church looks like, online or in person.
Yeah.
And so I think that's going to be an encouraging, insightful conversation.
And that's really what we wanted for tomorrow's as our final of the daily webinar series, kind of leading up to Easter. Is we wanted to leave you with an encouragement of no matter where you are, no matter how far along with this online service you've gotten, whether you're still doing church through your mobile phone on Facebook Live, it's gonna be okay, because no matter what, God is going to be able to use what you got and make it work. I know God does that. I mean, there's even a Bible story on that, how Jesus used the little fish and made many. So that being said, it's still all right. We've been doing. You have to give us a little bit of grace, okay? I've gotten a little mad. We're all gone. What is it? Quarantine crazy, I think, and that's definitely what's happening to me. So that being said, let's move on. David, do you want to tell everyone again who our guest is, and let's bring him on?
Yeah, real quick before we do that, last little bit of housekeeping. Let's go ahead and put up the info slide if we've got that there. I just want to make sure everyone knows we do have a lot of great resources that we've been pointing people to throughout all of these webinars. So for all of those resources, if you want to like sign up for them or download them, please go to info.ministrybrands.com/ministry online. Moderators, you can be dropping that link in the chat section. And then if you have any questions about a product or service that we mentioned, something that we touched on but didn't really get covered in depth, and you want to reach out on that, shoot us an email at careteam@ministrybrands.com. We've been answering those for the last 2 weeks, and it's been fantastic to hear from you. So please send those in. And now, without further ado, let's bring in today's guest, Daniel from protectmyministry.com.
Fantastic. Dan, we're so glad that you are able to join us today.
Man, I'm glad to be here.
So you want to tell everyone what you're...
That was like one of those awkward silence moments where you're like, am I going to say something? Are you going to say something? No, let's just let it hang here for 5 to 10.
Short of a reply.
Well, we're excited to have you on. Something that honestly every church needs to be really thinking about during this time, and that is online cyber security. And when we were putting together the webinar series, we definitely wanted to have Protect My Ministry on here, because you guys do such an amazing job with what you do, and people need to be aware of keeping, your church safe, even online during this time. It's so important. So we're excited to hear what you have today to share with us. And I know that me and David are planning to bring some questions here at the end. So hopefully we don't stump you, but I think you seem like a guy that knows what you're talking about.
Yeah, so before we jump into all the meat and potatoes, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Dan, and Protect My Ministry as a company?
Yeah, so I'm the director of marketing with Protect My Ministry, and a little bit about Protect My Ministry. We're one of the largest faith-based provider of background checks. So when it comes to servicing the church industry with background checks, we're one of the premier providers of those background checks. We're integrated across the majority of the larger CHMSs out there, and have a great solution with a lot of different things. We kind of lead the industry in a lot of different compliance issues, and have a whole team of people located in the U.S., which is a big thing in background checks, to make sure that you're dealing with someone who has a U.S.-based team that understands that. We've got a whole office, well, until we were remote, we had a whole office full of criminal researchers that are now all working remote. We've got a team of customer service people located in-house in the United States as well, too. And we service about 35,000 churches. So we run pretty close to about 1.6, 1.7 million background checks a year. So one or two.
Just a small amount.
Couple, yeah, one or two.
Yeah, what's crazy, I learned a lot just from my time getting to know you guys. But like on the state side of things, where like different states will have different things that they do. And so, I'd be like at a conference and it'd be like, hey, what state are you in? Oh, Texas. The person that knows that is this, and we'll get them in touch with you. And it's just like crazy, the network of people that you have and how well they know like the nuts and the bolts of all this stuff.
Yeah, my first day there, I after about 4 hours of onboarding and learning more about the world of background checks and how different background checks can be from provider to provider based upon the team and how they do them and the kind of information they pull, 4 hours into it, I was beyond sold, and not because I worked there. At my lunch break, I reached out to my church. I served in student ministry, and I said, hey, who do we use for our background checks? And they're like, oh, some really great company, PMM. We've been with them forever. I said, oh, good. I just started with them. I'm the director of marketing. And after what I heard this morning, my kids go here. Like, I wanted to make sure that's who we were with, because if not, we were going to have a conversation to switch, because not utilizing a provider that's well-versed in it or understands the church world and background checks and how important it is can be a game changer as far as getting the right background check ran and not missing records, which, as we're going to talk about a little bit, can cause a lot of problems for the church, and something that's preventable. And it just comes down to dealing with a provider that has that knowledge, and they can help guide you along and make sure you are running the right checks. And we'll get into that a little bit later.
Okay, awesome. Well, we can't wait.
Well, let's start right out of the gates with the first question here. So are there, when we look at church online, are there blind spots that you and your team at Protect My Ministry are aware of that churches need to keep in mind when it comes to ministry online, right? So we've moved from a building to online ministry, and are there just things that could easily be missed where you would go, hey, churches, pay attention to this. This is an area of risk?
Yeah, absolutely. And even getting outside of background checks and looking at just risk in general, there are definitely some. And doing a ministry online, as we've seen, could be a great thing. But as one famous superhero was told by his wise uncle, with great power comes great responsibility. And that means rethinking the new risk you're exposed to in this age of digital ministry. The online world can definitely create blind spots that churches aren't used to looking for. This is new to a lot of churches. It's not the same. They're not used to it. They're going into it quick. They weren't prepared to go into it. And those blind spots left unintended could definitely result in tragedy striking their ministry in ways that they didn't realize or think about before. Part of what I do in serving ministries in the vertical that I'm in requires that I stay informed on predators' activities. It's certainly not uplifting or a favorite part of what I do, but it's something that's important and a reminder that we live in a very sinful world. Just recently, a good example is just recently I saw a news article out of South Florida from March 23rd, so a couple weeks back, where authorities said that with an increase in students at home and on their computers for online learning during the coronavirus pandemic, the volume of sex predators online who are looking to take advantage of kids has also risen. And that's something churches need to be mindful of. In fact, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida in that article went on to say that the federal teams that keep an eye on sex predators and the activities have noticed the increase since kids have been at home amid the COVID-19 outbreak. They specifically said that they were seeing a big uptick in the amount of predators online talking to children. The U.S. Attorney said parents are preoccupied, they're getting their work done, and kids are being left off to kind of fend for themselves. And this is a predator's dream, to have these kids home on the computers all day long. Scary thing, like predators, a lot of people don't understand it. Unless you serve and work in a church, you may have a little bit better idea. But predators already see churches as soft targets due to the trusting nature of the church. And they look for ways to exploit any vulnerabilities they can find.
And that's, I mean, that as a kids pastor, that was a thing that really opened my eyes is, you know, I had heard about background checks, but hearing a presentation where it was going, kids ministries in particular are like a gold mine, you know, from the perspective of a predator, because they're always in need of volunteers, right? And it tends to be an area of ministry where it's like, hey, we need anyone we can get. And so there can be a rush to get people in there, and then it's direct access to children. And so I think we're becoming, as a culture, more and more aware of how vulnerable that is. But now it's like, hey, this is all moved online, and we're having Zoom meetings with adults and kids together. And so it's a challenging thing. And I'd love kind of hearing a bit of your perspective on that.
Yeah, definitely. It doesn't mean the churches should shy away from taking the ministry online. I think it just means they need to rethink ministry. And when they do that, it also means they must rethink risk. I think churches should have a real discussion about this and take steps in the church to help shield and protect their ministry from being exploited by a predator based on the risk they identify and discuss. And I think you hit on a good part too, that, you know, we've talked with churches during the pandemic and doing ministry online and everything. And a lot of churches, some churches are being more active in building volunteer pools right now, and some aren't. And I think that's, you know, working and serving in student ministry before and understanding kids ministry, like you said, there's always a need for volunteers. I think churches need to be thinking like, this is not going to last forever. We are going to go back to normal. We're going to go back to worshiping together and fellowshipping together, doing church in the church again. And we're all looking forward to that day. But you need to be prepared for when that day comes, because I think it's going to come pretty quick when it does. And when we're told we can open the doors, we're going to want to respond. We're going to want to see that happen quickly. And I think you need to be thinking now about, do you have a large enough pool of volunteers? Do you need to maybe look at putting more volunteers on now? Is this a great time to have those discussions amongst yourself as a church staff of, hey, how are we doing on background checks? Where are we at? How are we doing on volunteers? It's a great time to reach out to people. I think people are wanting to serve now in different ways. So I think you're going to be having conversations on the phone with people and maybe meeting new people that want to continue serving afterwards. And I think it's good to have a plan for that already. Think about background checks, because like you said, coming back the first Sunday back, what you don't want to be doing is scrambling. Everything's going to be going crazy and not have the volunteers you need. So I think building up the additional pool of volunteers now is just a good idea to look at.
Yeah, I love that idea of just keeping in mind we are gonna go back to normal at some point. But I think one of the opportunities that's come along with this whole conversation around COVID is that like things got paused in our ministries, and it gave us an opportunity here to take a fresh look at things that maybe we haven't looked at in a while, or we have to look at things a new way. And so that conversation about security, I think with everything else that's going on, right, and a weekend service can be one that's set aside just in normal, church life. But now it could be like, hey, we're figuring out live streaming or giving or all the rest. But I like that challenge of going, you've got some extra time to look at things maybe that you haven't looked at in a while. Take time to look at what's going on with security in your church, both online and then, like you said, when we get back to normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this is the time where you sit down and you evaluate that policy. You take a look at what you have. If there's experts you need to consult or things you need to Google, you do that. I think this is a great time to be reminded that we can also look to the Bible for answers to many of our questions. 1 Peter 5:8 reminds us to be sober-minded, to be watchful, that our adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. So I think keeping that in mind of, what can we do at this time to be mindful of what we're doing, to be watchful, to also be planning ahead for when we return, what that's going to look like as well. It's a great time, especially as we get past Easter and we get past this rush. How are we going to do Easter? And everyone's ready, can breathe, actually. I think it's a great time to sit down that following week in a staff meeting and have even a virtual staff meeting, have a great discussion around that and prepping for what's next. When people come back, what does it look like? What is VBS going to look like? And start getting those things in mind.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. So maybe you can help translate then that Bible verse into some real world stuff, right? So if we were to go, what does it mean to be sober-minded and watchful when we are rethinking online ministry? What would be like some principles or direction that you could give us in that?
Yeah, absolutely. While I'd love to give you a single answer, the truth is it's kind of complicated. Cyber predators are constantly changing their criminal tactics to better adapt to the environment. Just as no two ministries are the same, being sober-minded and watchful is unique for each individual ministry. To help churches get started, though, I think there are 3 areas we could evaluate, or they could evaluate and discuss the element of risk they have, along with what level they're comfortable tolerating. I'm by no means an expert on this or the creation of risk management policies and protocols, so I definitely urge churches to seek out and evaluate what is best for their own ministry, consult people who are legal experts and who are qualified to provide a true risk management policy. I understand background checks, and I see this all day long. This is 10, 12 hours of my day all day long. I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at predators. I'm looking at what's happening. We're looking at backgrounds, and we're getting a good idea of it. And I've been actively involved in the church for a long time, so I've got that experience, but I'm not an expert. What I hope is that this discussion we have today can hopefully get churches thinking and heading in the right direction for some areas they need to look at. And I think there's 3 of them to start with that we're to talk about today that we need to jump into and we can talk about. I think one of those first ones is we kind of already talked about a little bit, starting with the need to focus on your children's ministry, even when you're not meeting in person. As I talked about above earlier in the news article out of South Florida, there are risk of cyber predator elements infiltrating your children's or students' ministry, even if you're not meeting in person. They're online. They could do this a couple of different ways. One of the things I think you need to look for and be mindful of is they could do it either internally through having unmonitored access. And what that means is, like, if we're in a setting in the church and I've got volunteers, I've got staff working with kids, if someone pulls someone off to the side, that's going to stand out to me. I'm going to notice that, or someone's going to notice that. So that's a little bit harder when they have that monitored access to those kids if you have someone that has those intentions. But online, when they're behind a screen and we're putting kids and we're putting families in an online situation, what's going on those other screens is not monitored. You're not over their shoulder. You don't know what everyone's doing. And it's an easy way for a predator to lure a child into an external chat or some type of a social platform with the chat into it.
Hey, Dan, on that point, which I think is interesting, like you use the analogy of if we're at church together and someone pulls someone out into the parking lot or something like that, you're like, well, that's a little different. And so a red flag might go up, but we can look at like, all right, we're going to have a Zoom meeting here and we're going to have a login code, or we're going to, have some sort of invite only thing here. And we go, okay, we're protected and we're safe, but it doesn't mean that like a link to some other chat service couldn't be shared or a personal email couldn't be given, where that act of pulling someone aside it's still happening. It's just happening in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good point to make is like, think about the people who have access to the information that you've got. Could they then follow up a Zoom meeting with someone they've identified that they want to prey on? And could they then reach out to them and pull them into a side conversation? Hey, I want to follow up on that Zoom meeting today. Could you have another Zoom meeting with me? And that's where they kind of start that process of grooming them. So I think that's definitely one element to look at. Unfortunately, it's hard to really think about but from the inside, but there's also an external element as well. So externally, someone could pose as a child in an online setting to get access to your ministry in disguise. Again, if I show up and I try to walk in and sit in a class that's an Awana class, I'm going to look kind of out of place sitting there in the circle. However, online, you don't know who's behind that login. And I think it's a lot easier for someone to pose as a child in an online setting and they can get access to your ministry, like I said, kind of in disguise. And I think it's something you need to kind of take into consideration when formulating your risk management policy, protocols, and also planning online events. I think a good example of that would be about how many headlines you've seen or heard where the predator was busted by law enforcement after trying to meet up with who they thought a potential victim was, only to find out it was an undercover officer posing as the victim. So here you've got that predator who may have been posing as a teen, trying to meet up with a teen or younger. And here you've got the officer who's also fooling the predator by posing as someone else they're not. And neither one of them really know until the meetup happens. And all the conversations and the grooming that are leading up to that meetup took place online typically, where many times the predator will pose as a child or student themselves. And so I don't think you can not think enough that you can't be sure of who's on the other side of that login.
Real quick, while you've been sharing, Dan, there's a question that came up I think would be a good fit into all of this. They're asking, what do you share with people, or how would we give Susan is her name? How would we give Susan the ability to answer this question? So she's saying there are people already serving and have been serving for 20 plus years. They're the ones who don't think we should have to run a background check. What would you share with her and let her know? It's like, hey, we understand, but fill in the blank. What would you say?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've actually gotten that question before. I think it came up in a roundtable I was part of with Church Exec Magazine. And one of the ways that I think we can look at it in a really just an honest way to say is like, you may have been serving for 20 years and I know you and everyone knows you and all of our members and longtime members recognize you, but the person that's visiting doesn't necessarily know you. And so one of the things we like to do is say that, when someone comes in and they have questions, like when I take my kids to a new church or something, I'm going to have questions about how's their children's ministry run? How do they volunteers? How do they manage it? What kind of background checks do they do? And if I hear they background check somebody once and know they've been here for 20 years, I don't know that person. I've never met them before. I may have never met the pastor that's telling me that either. So I don't have that level of trust. And so I think a great way to address that is saying like, look, not to single you out, but everyone standardly gets rescreened automatically every year or every 2 years or whatever the church feels is appropriate. And we'll talk a little bit about rescreening later. And I think the easiest way is to just standardize the policy and don't make it about the person, but make it about the policy. It's kind of one of those, when you want to have a discussion with an employee who has poor performance, you don't make it about the employee, you make it about the performance. And I think it's the same way too. It's like, don't make that discussion about her, make that discussion about standardizing. And that's why it's so important to have these policies and these protocols in place. So when you get that question, you have one consistent answer and it doesn't look like you're playing favorites or you're not being fair amongst different people. Because if you get a hunch about someone and you background check them more and then someone you don't, how is that going to look if you ever get taken into a legal situation? Well, why did you background check me 4 times and not them? Or on the flip side, if something happens, imagine what the news media is going to do to you as a church if they find out that you haven't background checked that person in 20 years. You may know them. The news media is going to destroy you in the headlines with that. That is going to be bolded, top of the headlines. That's going to be one of the things they find out they're getting access to. So I think the easiest way to answer is, one, have a good standard policy of how often you rescreen people and make that frequent. And I think the other thing too is make that conversation about the process and why you do that. This is a great way to give new visitors a way to feel comfortable knowing that our ministry is safe and we do everything we can. And we appreciate everything you've done for us for 20 years. Of course, follow up with that and build them up with that on the end.
It's good.
Yeah, and
that's a good answer.
That's great. And I think part of where maybe it's tricky right now is while some churches have leaned into that process of standardization and go, hey, if you're going to be in the building around kids or whatever, this is our policy. And so now it's changed a little bit, and you could have a volunteer with kids and it's online. And is your recommendation that online ministry would just kind of be rolled into that standardization process where it's like, hey, even if you're going to volunteer to lead a small group online, we still want this same policy of running a background check?
Absolutely. And I think you'd almost want it even more because, again, you don't have that interaction, that one-on-one interaction, and you're then allowing them into the back end of a lot of your systems. And that is where you could potentially have people, and we're going to talk a little bit later, we'll get into that, the reasons I think that's important too, and to think about data vulnerability as well, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I think going back real quick, and I want to go back to it so we can keep on track, but going back to the external element of it, I think another thing churches need to be thinking about is, having these online events. If you meet someone's posing and someone online, you invite them in there, they're going to have access to getting a list, just like on this Zoom. I can look up on the screen and see all your names up there. All I've got to do is screenshot that, and I've got everyone's list of names that go to that. It doesn't take a lot of work on the internet to use a name and to track down a social profile or family information or an address of a victim. So I think understanding that where you're sharing it, who's involved, and what kind of information they have access to publicly is something to be important, because it's a lot different, like I said, when someone's in the building, where you've got people that have been through a child safety training program and they know the steps and the signs of grooming to watch for. Online settings, it's much easier to do that. And I think also you talk about the older kids, especially more in the tweens and like teens and the student ministry, kids are not always the wisest when it comes to what they share online or how secure their information is. I don't think anyone would probably argue very often with that. I'm the parent of a teenager myself. So I know when I was serving with student ministry, I know there were students who had multiple social profiles on the same platforms. And a lot of times, some of those their parents were not aware of. And they did it so they have these alter egos, or maybe they want all their friends to see everything because they weren't comfortable with who they are. And there's a whole other world of problems we can talk about there. But the fact is it exists. That can create a very dangerous situation where if a predator gained access to them in one of those other platforms externally and started that grooming process, even if the parents think they're checking on their profiles and sure they've given you their password and you have their email and you can pull it up anytime and see the chats that are on there, do you have all their accounts? I think that's one thing that you've got to just educate parents to think about, and putting together a class on that, we'll talk about a little later, is a great way to do that. I think, again, the online world is one where predators are very familiar with. They're very cunning, and they know what they're doing. They've been playing in that world longer than the churches have been going into that world.
Okay, so that's the kind of thing, like as a parent of teens myself, where I go, all right, that's freaking me out a little bit.
Yeah.
And I do want to be educated. So do you have any advice or resources that you would point people to that would help in this area?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So it's nothing to do with PMM, but there is something I personally use myself, and I used it in student ministry, and it was a great resource. And the moderators have got the links, they'll drop in the chat, but it's called the Culture Translator, and it's from a group called Axis.org, AXIS.org. And who Axis is, they're a group whose mission is to build lifelong faith by helping parents and caring adults talk to their kids about what they otherwise wouldn't. Those conversations you don't want to have. They're uncomfortable. And they help you one kind of conversation at a time. So they have this vision to see all caring adults, whether it be parents or leaders at church or whoever it is, equipped with the conversation, the discipleship, and the culture translation skills needed to reach the next generation for Christ. They actually started, I think, about 11 years ago, and they were a traveling speaking team where they spoke directly to thousands of students to impact their lives for Christ by relating them directly through their culture. They relate directly to them, understanding their culture. They realized, though, that to make an impact on students that would result in a lifelong relationship with Jesus, they need to speak to the people who spent the most of the time in the next generation. So that's when they pivoted, and the kind of light bulb went on with them, and they made a transition to create content for the parents and caring adults in Gen Z's life. So instead of speaking to the students directly themselves, they have a great email you can sign up for. I get it weekly. They will help you reach that through culture translation as their method they want you to use. And so they find all the most relevant current topics in a teen's life, and they give you the information and the resources to have amazing conversations about those topics, which then lead to lifelong relationships between you and your teen and Christ. It's a good glimpse into it. And if you haven't done it as a parent, you'll learn all the TikToks and the Fortnites and everything else that's out there, and that it's Rona, not coronavirus, and all the trends on phones and all the accounts and all the dangers out there. They'll give you an email weekly about 3 or 4 relevant topics. That's completely free. And it's a great way to understand teen culture and why it matters and some of the things that teens face every day. They have options you can upgrade. I've never personally upgraded. Sorry, culture translator. I haven't. Where you can get more resources, and churches that have big student ministries, definitely something to check out. But their free one's great for me. I read all the time. They've been sending a lot of great information, especially with all this. And it kind of even makes you look cool if you're an old guy like me, like the 7th grade boys. They'd be like, "Oh, Mr. Dan, how do you know that?" I'm like, "Oh man, come on, I know all about that." Like, you know?
I just signed up. I'm not kidding. I just did it.
Yeah, I mean, just last week, I think they were discussing how quarantine is a gamer's paradise. So think about that. We're talking about online. A forced confinement has caused many to turn to video games to pass time, as if they need an excuse. In fact, I was reading an article, and I think Verizon said that they saw a 102% increase in gaming traffic compared to a normal day. And I think that's something to be mindful of, because platforms like Steam and Twitch are also reporting record numbers as well. And those are platforms that predators could use to prey on your children. They've got live chat, they've got video, they're inviting them into their room. The discussions that go on there aren't great. Discord is another one that's got chats out there. You can get all these fringe chat things going. And so after reading that, I started doing some more searches about predators. I'm sure IT loves my Google searches that utilize platforms like the ones I kind of talked about to prey on teens. And I actually came across an article from the New York Times, and I think the moderators, I gave them a link to it. And it covered that with platforms like those, sexual predators and other bad actors have found an easy access point into the lives of young people. They meet them online through multiplayer video games and chat apps. They make a virtual connection right there in a victim's home. They have a shared norm they can talk about. They strike up a conversation. They gradually build trust. Often they pose as children themselves, confiding in their victims with false stories of hardship or self-loathing. And their goal is typically to dupe children into sharing sexually explicit photos and videos themselves, which they then use as blackmail for more imagery, much of it increasingly graphic and violent as they go. The article kind of went on to say things that the reports of abuse are emerging with unprecedented frequency around the country, with some perpetrators now grooming hundreds and even thousands of victims. Because you think of how many they have access to at once. It's not finding someone here and spending time. They've got hundreds and thousands to go after at once. According to their review of different prosecutions and court records and law enforcement reports and academic studies, games are a very common target, but predators also find many victims on social platforms like Instagram and Kick Messenger. So,
hey, real quick, I just want to maybe give like a real world example from that. Like growing up, for me, a video game was I take a cartridge and I plug it into some box here, right? And if it doesn't work, I blow in it.
Yep.
If I wanted to talk to anyone while I played that video game, they were sitting next to me in the room. But that is not today's video games at all. Almost every video game, I would say probably all of them at this point have a social element. And those that get into it, like my twin boys, every game they are talking with their friends and they are interacting. And there is countless opportunities for new friend requests to come in, new conversations to be struck up. And it is something that has to be monitored and understood, because people will ask, what is your name? How old are you? Where do you live? And while those seem like normal conversations for a friend to ask another friend, it can also be malicious, like you're saying, if it is someone posing to be someone they're not, trying to get that information.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's kind of like, I found another article and was talking about the old saying I've heard before, where children play, predators prey. And we think of like when we were kids, that'd be at the playground, like your parents looking for the guy with the hat standing behind a tree with a lollipop trying to lure kids over. That's not the place. This article, and I think it was from Protect Young Minds was the group. They talked about how today young people spend time on digital playgrounds. So people with dangerous intentions, they gather there as well. They've moved. They're not going to the park to find your kids playing tag. They're going on to Fortnite to find a chat, or Steam to find a stream to get a talk going. They talked about that live chat feature, which lets kind of anyone else have access to your child. There's apps that allow kids to post videos themselves. How risky those are, you think of like TikTok, and I believe there's one over, it's more popular in India and China, it's called Kwai. I don't know if I said that right. Clip, that's another popular social video app, where you post a 15-second clip of themselves, and they kind of covered on that app that many kids like to engage in challenges, such as creating a dance video using a particular song. There's prize money, social approval. There's all big motivators for kids seeking connection and validation. A point they made in that, and they talked about, it's good to be mindful of, is these apps have become hunting grounds for predators who groom kids. They compliment their video. They ask to see more skin. There's a trend of sex offenders also sending explicit videos to kids and then asking them to record themselves imitating the video. They reference that they're known sextortion rings. And if you don't know what that is, it's disgusting, but they target kids online. The kids are befriended. They're asked for photos, which become increasingly sexual, and then threatened if the child won't produce more. So, hey, we're going to show this to your parents. We're going to show this to your friends. We're going to post this online. You have to keep sending more. So the world can get really dangerous really quick online. So I think what does it have to do with taking ministry online? I think these things aren't necessarily tied directly to that. I think you have to think back to where we started when we were talking about, for predators figured out they could access or get access to a virtual list of the kids in your ministry during an online event. You have to be mindful of planning that when you have online events to help to educate parents and kids at your church. I wouldn't, but I would tell you to offer to have a virtual class for your parents where you help them better know and understand the dangers out there as their kids spend more time online. A church I served at, we did that. We had parents come in after our student ministry session during second service. We had them come in and we talked about the dangers out there. We gave them access to those resources like access.org, and we talked about these dangers that are out there. I saw one creative thing, and we'll move on real quick, but I saw a creative thing a ministry did do recently, and I don't have a link. I'm sorry, moderators. You can Google it and probably find it. I think it was on Fox. There was a church that I believe was in Texas, and they set up their own private Minecraft server. And in their own private Minecraft server that they maintain, the church maintains, only allows their students in on it. They set up a virtual Easter egg hunt in there. They built a whole Minecraft world and hid Minecraft Easter eggs. And that way those kids are coming in and they're in their world. They're safe within that secured server where other people and they're controlling access. So I think there are some things you can do. I know in our student pastor at my last church, he would jump in and play Fortnite with the students so he could kind of see what was going on. Hey, what are you going to be doing tomorrow at 6 o'clock? Meet me in Fortnite. And he could kind of see what was being talked about and kind of keep an eye on some of the kids that we thought it might be a good idea to kind of see what was going on in their life outside the walls of the church.
That's good. And I love that idea of helping parents. It to me just seems like a really great idea for churches to broaden maybe their idea of what it means to train and equip parents and go, we'll teach you about discipling your children. We'll also teach you just about the context of the world they're living in right now and try to help guide you in that. I think all of this stuff with security makes a lot of sense. And we tend to go like, hey, we need to make sure that our kids are safe, right? And our teens and our tweens are safe. We need to understand this digital environment. We need to make sure that there's background checks on anyone who has contact with them in a ministry environment. Beyond that, though, right? Are there other areas that churches should be mindful of where it's like, it's not just kids ministry or youth ministry where you need to have this in mind, but other areas of your ministry as well?
Yeah, they're definitely, I'll get into those and kind of move through here. I know we're going kind of long, but I'm pretty passionate about the kids side of it and the student side of it, but there are some other areas you can look at. So cyber predators that look to harm children, they're definitely out there like we've kind of discussed, but there are other areas churches need to be mindful of and should also discuss evaluating as a church. A different type of cyber predator exists. Most people call those people hackers. Hackers are someone who wants to infiltrate the data that churches store in their system. So the data you have stored in your system, they want access to it. In doing this, they can gain access to valuable information that can be sold, used to defraud people. And at the same time, they can also damage the reputation and the public image of ministries at a time when you think about it right now, we're taking our churches online. We are front and center of the world as much as we have been in a lot of cases. They have an opportunity to damage that public image of ministries and the Big C church in a big way right now. So one of the things I think I want to talk about from that, and we talk about even a lot around ministry brands, is to educate yourself on password strength. And you may be like, that's password. I make it complex. I do this, I do that. Really, is that the thing? But if you think about it, that's one of the easiest first ways. You're probably using systems that are pretty secure as far as breaking into through like a force attack from the outside is what a hacker would call it, trying to force their way through a vulnerability in the system. But a lot of times people using your systems lack the knowledge when it comes to cybersecurity best practices. This creates all kinds of new vulnerabilities. Think about your less tech savvy members in your congregation, your volunteers, and on your staff. They're more likely to have weak passwords or use the same password across all platforms they log into. Guess what? Hackers know this. They're Google on the internet, there's a list of most common passwords, 10,000 most common passwords. They'll create a program, they'll run those passwords through and try to force into something. They're going to start with something easy, a lot of times like an email account, where they think they can find an easy password. And by that email, they can reset things in that email. So just be mindful. So I think need to definitely take time to evaluate what someone with ill intentions could access within your system. If they gained access to that, then take the next steps to educate your members about those risks and the importance for strong, unique passwords. Things like using a passphrase instead of a complex password, or not using the same password for multiple logins, for example, are two great places you could start. And that can a lot of times be your first line of defense standing between you and someone who wants access to the data in your systems.
Yeah, fantastic. What when we look at things like the vulnerability of data, how do you measure that, or how do you evaluate that in a church? Because churches are handling so much. We may not think about it, but there's so much personal information that's out there. People registering for men's groups or women's groups, or the VBS sign up, or it can be like medical, like all sorts of stuff is in there. So how does the church go about that?
Yeah, I think there's some good resources you can look at about different scams and things. For one, on online security, the FTC has a great site. And I gave the moderators a link to the FTC's online security section. You can sign up for a daily email. I get an email from the FTC giving me all the different things that are going on, consumer scams, all these different things you're seeing people do with ill intentions out there, how they're getting duped. So I think that's a good way to start looking at it to understand what some of those elements utilize a lot of times. But yeah, you have to remember the criminal data you keep, like addresses, financial information, personal information about your staff, your members, and your visitors. It's valuable, and predators know that. And you have to look at that. And I would say that what you want to do is be able to check that level of data vulnerability you have inside and out. And kind of what I mean by vulnerability is in computer security, vulnerability is described as a weakness that can be exploited by a threat actor, such as an attacker, to perform unauthorized actions within your computer system. Someone who wants to get into your computer and do something you're not supposed to do. To exploit the vulnerability, an attacker must have at least one applicable tool or technique. That's all they need. They must have at least one. But once they have one applicable tool or technique that can connect to a system weakness in the frame. So vulnerability is kind of in the computer world. That's called the attack surface, is what they actually call that. I was reading an article on a cybersecurity website. It was called Dark Reading, and I think I also gave a link to that too. And it was talking how hackers used a simple phishing scam where they used a combination email scam and a social engineering phone call to target a parish, claiming to be a construction company who was working for that parish, doing work on the church. They made the phone call to the church. However, that wasn't from the construction company. The scammers told the church that the payments they were making were late. The church said, no, our payments aren't late. We were making our payments. And in the article, a statement directly from the parish said the construction company called inquiring as to why they had not paid their monthly payment on the project for the past 2 months. Now, brace yourself. This totaled approximately $1,750,000. The scammers convinced the church that the construction company they hired had changed their bank. Hindsight being 2020, whoever received that call should have confirmed with another source, but they didn't. The FBI got involved, and upon deeper investigation, they found out that their email system had been hacked, and the perpetrators were able to deceive them into believing the construction company had changed their bank and wiring instructions. The result was their payments were sent to a fraudulent bank account, and the money was then swept out by the perpetrators before anyone knew what had happened. According to the FBI, they said the criminals had breached the church's email account and then began a waiting game during which the hackers sat back and read all the conversations in the inbox. Eventually, they were able to glean enough information to convince the church to wire them the money. Before the church realized it was out $1,750,000 in the middle of a major renovation. All it took was a few emails, some Photoshop skills, and a phone call that derailed those good intentions of that parish. So it can happen. They're going to find that weakness, and it can happen. So think about there are going to be more scams out there. There are going to be more people making those attempts. As people lose their jobs, people will get more desperate. We're going to see a rise in those. Educate your staff, educate your volunteers, educate your members, do them a favor, and talk about password security. Look at the data vulnerabilities you have. It kind of comes down to determining the level of risk you're tolerant on taking and acting to ensure you're not inadvertently exposing your ministry to more risk by not addressing each risk area.
And I like, it's important because right now we've heard it in other webinars, so many COVID-19 emails are coming in from almost everybody you get emails from. And so there can be a bit of this, like, my inbox is flooded. So like, yes, whatever. And you're moving through this stuff. And if you haven't taken some time to train your church staff and your church members on what to be looking for, you can click on something real quick or get yourself going down a road real quick that seems innocent on the surface. And it's like, if you'd been trained, you would know right away, like you said, verify this.
Yeah, I think a good example is like one of the platforms, training platforms, I know you guys are familiar with that we use here at Ministry Brands. It's called Ningio. There is a cost to use Ningio. I'm not sure what it is. We're not affiliated with them. We don't own them. They're not part of us. I can't speak to that cost in depth. I just take the classes when IT sends them to me every month. But when I did take a look at their pricing page, they did have special plans if you had less than 100 users. They were very good at hiding it. But they're really great, like 4 or 5 minute interactive, and they talk about phishing scams, all these different force attacks, all these different things. You can actually learn quite a bit from that. And the moderators can drop some links on it. So I think also knowing who has access to your systems and their specific permission settings is one of the steps you need to take. And also, as you kind of touched on before, and I'd be remiss without saying, working for Protect My Ministry, knowing the background of every staff and volunteer is critical, especially when you're getting started taking ministry online. Just because you're not meeting in person doesn't mean you're not exposing yourself in other ways. You may be exposing yourself more, because when I went into serving student ministry on Wednesdays and Sundays, I wasn't logging in the computer to do anything at church. Now, if I'm serving, I'm logging into a system most likely. I'm getting into a CHMS to send an email. I'm getting information mixed with my own accounts that can be dangerous. So when you think about all the remote work and the poor security practice together, your safeguards are automatically weakened against hackers. And I'm going to be redundant, and you need to forgive me, but keep in mind when we talk about passwords, look it up. The most common password ever is still 123456. That is the most popular password. It makes the top list almost every year. I gave a link to, I think it was a Wikipedia that shows top passwords. Just Google it, and you'll find list after list after list. And while we already discussed the importance of strong passwords to prevent hackers from stealing sensitive information, what if that hacker wasn't a hacker at all from the outside, but an ill-intentioned staff member or volunteer? So I think that's why you need to understand, like, if I'm in there serving and I know you use the system and I think you maybe have a weaker password and I know your email address, then I might try to log into the system from me acting like I'm you at my house. And so if I have a program to run a lot of passwords, then I might be able to figure that out. So I think that's really important to make sure that you're knowing what background check to run, and that is crucial. Ensure you don't miss records. We actually, we took a look at data from over 1.6 million background checks they ran over the course of a year. And we uncovered things that were eye-opening and alarming at the same time. One thing we saw is that churches, the background checks on church employees and volunteers had increased by 12% year over year, which is a good thing. Churches are starting to understand how important background checks are to protecting the church. However, we started looking at other data points within it, and we identified that 4 out of every 10 churches were not running the correct background check, potentially exposing themselves to missing criminal records. We basically looked at, based upon what their state they were in, what checks should they run, and we identified that 40% of those records, or 4 out of every 10 churches, what it worked out to, were running checks and possibly missing records. How can that impact a church? Well, an example would be, I believe it was last year, there's a church in Florida where the pastor was arrested and he was charged with 500 felony counts of possession of child pornography and 3 counts of failing to meet sex offender requirements. That church looked at the background check package they ran, and had they ran the correct check, they would have found out he was a convicted sex offender in another state.
Hey,
he didn't register when he moved in. That's how he got those 3. I believe that's how he got the 3 counts of failing to meet sex offender requirements.
Hey, real quick on that. I guess that's something that may not jump out to people when you say the correct background check, right? Because I think a lot of people would go, you just run a background check.
Yeah.
There's one and you run it. So what do you mean, like the correct?
That's what I thought too. And that's where, yeah, and like you said before, you're like, oh, it's Texas, it's this person. We've got experts that can guide you based upon where you're at. But some of the elements you need to look at is what state you're located in, what county you're located in, and then also the states and counties that the person you're running the background check has lived in. There's not one single national database like everyone thinks. All states and counties don't report records the same way. And so if you're only running a check on one state, but someone's lived in another state or another county, and counties don't report up the same, then there's a good chance for those records there, it's not going to show up. So that's something to be mindful of. Thinking about alias names, one of the things we require is a social security number. And a lot of people are like, oh, I don't feel comfortable. Why do you need that? We need that social security number so we can get a list of aliases and a list of addresses. With that list of aliases, then we can start to run checks against those alias names and think like, oh, well, that's kind of weird, but what if someone was married? Now they have an alias from their maiden name. And so you need to be able to look at both sides of that and kind of understand what background checks you need to run. And like I said, that's why it's important in dealing with someone that understands background checks, understands what churches need to protect churches, not what Uber drivers need or your retail workers need. You need to partner with someone that understands what a church needs to protect a church, knowing what's at risk, and make sure you're running the right check. That's why it's important to have a good US-based customer service team that you can pick up the phone and call. You can pick up the phone and call Protect My Ministry right now. 3 other people are in the moderator in the chat with us right now. but they've got a whole staff standing by to help you select and give you the advice about what packages you should run to make sure you're not missing records. That would be a great conversation to have now before the need returns even more and you end up running the wrong one in mass. Think about how damaging that could be. You're going to be very busy getting back into church, and you don't want to be wondering if you have the right background check. We've got a great map on our website that our customers utilize, and it shows national recommendations, general ones. But again, if you have a question, we have a customer service team that can help you out. We have this great sales team. We have a team of actual criminal researchers. They are criminal researchers. That's what they are professionally doing. They understand, hey, this is where we need to look for records. It's not that easy. They literally have old paper fax machines. They have to get to some counties. Those counties are not reporting upline when they can't even take any fax.
So another thing about background checks that we had discussed earlier that was surprising to me is the idea of rescreening, right? So I used to think like there's one background check and you run it and you're done. But that's not necessarily how it works or should work.
Yeah, and we saw that too, actually. You bring that up. We saw that on average, 90% of churches do not rescreen their staff and volunteers annually. Now, contrast that. We looked at data across youth sports leagues. Youth sports leagues rescreen an average of 99% of leagues are rescreening yearly. That same coach, same assistant coach, those same people, they're rescreening them every year consistently with a consistent policy about it. On the flip side, churches, again, the trusting nature, predators know this. A lot of predators haven't been caught. So maybe they get in, they don't have something, they get caught afterwards. You don't know. They're probably going to come and tell you what they got busted for that week. You need to be able to have a policy in place to rescreen. So I think it's definitely something you need to look at and decide like, hey, we rescreen and this is the frequency, and have an answer as to why. Because if you ever question, you're going to need to know how to explain why you chose that answer.
Fantastic. And I love what you said about making sure you're partnering with someone who knows the needs of the church. I think that is super important. We're coming up on the end of our time here. I was wondering if you could give us then some next steps for churches, right? We've covered a lot of great information. Going forward, what are some things you would recommend for churches to be doing in this area of rethinking cybersecurity and taking their ministries online?
Yeah, well, I think definitely it's time to start talking about now, because crisis situations create opportunities for little individuals or groups. They always do. Kind of what I mentioned from the very start, churches are already seen as a soft target by predators and bad actors. Add a crisis to the mix, and predators see it as one more opportunity for them to exploit. They're looking at how many vulnerabilities there are. There's a crisis. People aren't focusing. Many times your head's down. You're trying to meet the needs you can with intent to focus on doing so. It's that intent focus that causes those blind spots to risk for your church and opportunity for predators. So I would tell churches, avoid that hurt, avoid the headlines, be diligent, educate yourself and your staff and your volunteers and your congregation. You can't have enough layers of security there. Understand that things have changed rapidly. A lot of churches were not planning to take their ministry fully online a month ago. Wasn't probably in their purview. Maybe they did. Let's go back 6 months ago. Probably not. And so with that, you have risk there. So have those discussions, consult experts in creating risk management policies and protocols and helping you write those to where you're not going to miss anything and the church is going to be protected. And most importantly, you can, by maximizing those safeguards, you protect your ministry, you perform your due diligence. Again, I would say I can't end the conversation without talking about routine background screenings. They're affordable and they shouldn't be ignored. That's a low cost way to get some peace of mind and one critical piece of the puzzle. Background checks are not the silver bullet to predators, but they are a very crucial piece, and it should really start there along with a well-written policy and protocol. So we're in this with churches. We're right there. Like you said, many of us are working in churches. We're experiencing the same thing. We serve ministries. We serve churches. It's what we love to do. The background check experts, they're there to provide a consultation. Don't rack your brain about knowing what county they're from and all this and how to pick that. Let us help you with that. That's where we are experts, and we do have people that can help you with that and help make sure you select that correct screening package. And definitely, again, consult the experts, evaluate and address your needs and your risk outside of background checks. I can't stress the importance of that and knowing what is at stake right now.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate, I know this was a lot to go through, but it is so important for churches right now as we're moving into a new space to make sure that we're doing our due diligence and keeping our team safe and keeping our kids safe and doing our part in educating. And so thank you for the time that you've taken sharing
Absolutely.
this with us, and just a great conversation. I want to let everyone that's watching know that the entire Protect My Ministry team is here to answer any questions. If you have specific questions about background checks, maybe what they cost or how often you should run them or what that would look like to bring into your ministry, please throw those questions in the Q&A, and they'll be happy to jump on those and answer them. Tim,
and as
yeah.
you can tell, I just wanted to throw this out there, and then we're going to wrap this up. As you can tell, there is a lot to cover with keeping your ministry protected online. So we will make the slides, because there's even some slides that we didn't get to, because there's so much. We're going to make the slides available like we have been. And then, just like you said, David, reaching out to care team at ministrybrands.com with your questions, or just going to Protect My Ministry, their website, and going through that route. That would be a great way to go about it. So we know there's a lot to cover. We know that it was like a lot, and a lot of us as churches, we get this like sinking feeling of like it doesn't seem like there's so much out there. How could, like, there's hope? Like, where's the hope? And the hope is there are amazing people like Dan, like Protect My Ministry, that are in it, are reading it, are researching it, that are on top of the trends, that see all this stuff, and they can inform you. So you don't have to be the expert in this. We have the experts available to you. So I encourage every single one of you, if you do not have if you haven't thought about this, cybersecurity and just protecting your ministry in general, go to Protect My Ministry, get involved with them, become a member with them, because it's cannot be overstressed. So with that, let's change gears a little bit, David. Remind everyone that tomorrow we have just an encouragement, last minute tips and tricks, and just an encouraging word from your pastor, which will be super good.
Yeah. My pastor, Kenner Gottsman, is going to come on. We're going to have just a word of encouragement, have a conversation about some things we've learned in this time, and maybe some things that we should rediscover and never let go of when it comes to doing church. And then also a reminder that today and tomorrow, daily webinars about giving and live streaming. We'll have links for those. As always, Tim Cross, I'm glad you got to spend this hour with me, and I look forward to doing it with you tomorrow.
Yep, and I can't wait that tomorrow will be our last one. All right, and on that note, just kidding. I love you, David. All right, everyone, thank you, and we will see you all tomorrow.